The late September sun cast long shadows through the kitchen window as Alan Taylor scrubbed the remains of a hard day's work from his hands. 25 years of construction had left his palms calloused, each scar a quiet reminder of his dedication to building a life for his family. Alan glanced at the clock, 4:15 p.m. His son, Ryan, would be at soccer practice until 6 o'clock, leaving Alan a rare moment to review the estimates for the Thompson project. But his focus wavered as a buzzing phone interrupted the quiet. Ryan's iPhone, forgotten in his rush to practice, lit up with notifications. Alan normally respected his kid's privacy, but the preview snippets on the screen made his chest tighten. Dad doesn't even know. Jason's way cooler than Dad. Alan's hands, steady enough to frame a house or lay perfect tile, trembled as he unlocked the phone. He scrolled through messages between Ryan and his best friend, Kevin, each line a fresh wound. Bro, your mom's boss? That's wild. Nah, Dad's clueless. Too busy with his precious projects to notice anything. Jason lets me drive his new BMW. Coolest dude ever. Alan read further, his heart sinking. The messages weren't just about Ryan bonding with his mother's boss, Jason. They painted a damning picture of an affair. Ryan described lunches, golf lessons, Lakers tickets, and whispered promises from Jason that Ryan seemed to prefer over his father's steady guidance. The final message made Alan sit heavily in the kitchen chair he'd built himself. TBH, I think I prefer Jason as a dad. He listens about college, not just work lectures like Build Your Way Up. Jason says connections matter more than hard work now. Welcome to 2024, old man. The words pierced deeper than any insult Alan had ever heard. The sound of the garage door opening snapped him out of his daze. May, his wife of 20 years, breezed in with her designer handbag swinging at her side. Her tailored blazer and skirt, no doubt worth more than a week of Alan's labor, fit her perfectly. Oh, Alan, she said, pausing when she saw him. You're home early. I thought you had that big project in Beverly Hills today. Finished ahead of schedule, Alan replied evenly, masking the storm inside. Good man, reliable. He let the last word hang in the air as he studied her reaction. May's fingers fiddled with her car keys. That's nice. I just came to grab some paperwork. The dealership's been crazy with end-of-quarter sales. Selling a lot of BMWs, are you? Alan asked, his voice deceptively calm. May froze, a flicker of something, fear, crossing her face. What do you mean? Seems our son's an expert on them these days, Alan said, standing slowly. Quite the car enthusiast. Even knows how they handle. Her face drained of color. You know how teenagers are. Cars and all that. Alan's expression hardened. Tell me, May. Does Jason know you're spending the college fund I earned on his little projects? Or does he just enjoy the free golf lessons? It's not like that, May shot back, her voice rising. You're always working, Alan. Always covered in dust and concrete. Jason, he understands things, connections, ambition. Alan stepped closer, his voice sharp as steel. Understands how to spend another man's money and play father to another man's son while I'm out building our future. May's chin lifted defiantly. He's helping Ryan network. Teaching him what you never could. Alan's laugh was dry and humorless. Teaching him what? That loyalty's a commodity? That foundations don't matter if the walls look good? Let me tell you something, May, everything in this house, everything in Ryan's life, was built by these hands. Every late night, every weekend spent laying tile or framing someone else's dreams while you complained about my hours. That's the price of what we had. And you traded it for a leased BMW and courtside tickets. May stepped back, suddenly unsure. What are you going to do? Alan didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to his work papers, his calm demeanor chilling. You should get back to work, May. Wouldn't want Jason waiting. Oh, and May? He glanced over his shoulder. Hope that blazer keeps you warm. Winter's coming. Her heels clicked against the garage floor as she hurried out, her exit punctuated by the roar of her engine. Alan stood in the empty house, his mind whirring. The betrayal wasn't just hers, it was Ryan's, too. His own son had chosen glitz over grit. Alan pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Phil," he said to his accountant, his voice steady. "Remember that contingency plan we talked about? Time to execute. I want every account secured before the banks close." The kitchen felt colder after May left, the echo of her heels lingering in Alan's mind. He sat back at the table, staring at the pile of unpaid bills and estimates for the next month's projects. The life he'd built, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, felt suddenly fragile, like a foundation riddled with cracks. Alan's phone buzzed. It was Phil, his accountant and longtime confidant. "I've locked the primary accounts," Phil said without waiting for a greeting. "The joint savings are frozen. I've also moved the equity line for the house to the trust in your name. She won't be able to touch it without your consent." "Good," Alan said, his voice steady. "What about the college fund?" Phil hesitated. "There's some activity I need to dig into. Transfers. Smaller amounts, but consistent. If it's May, she's been siphoning for months." Alan clenched his jaw. He wasn't surprised, but hearing it confirmed stoked the embers of his anger. "Check everything. I want to know exactly how much is left. And Phil, keep this quiet. She doesn't know I'm onto her yet." Phil agreed, and Alan ended the call, feeling a small measure of control returning. But securing his finances was just the first step. His thoughts turned to Ryan. Alan heard the clatter of cleats before the door swung open. Ryan's voice was cheerful as he dropped his bag onto the floor. "Dad, you're home early." Alan looked up from his seat in the living room, his expression calm but unreadable. "Practice go well?" "Yeah. Coach says I'm looking good for varsity next season." Ryan's enthusiasm faltered as he caught the serious look on his father's face. Everything okay?" "Sit down, Ryan," Alan said, gesturing to the couch. Ryan frowned but complied, his usual confidence replaced by unease. Alan pulled out Ryan's phone and placed it on the coffee table between them. "You left this behind," Alan said. "Thought I'd make sure there wasn't anything urgent." Ryan's face paled as he realized what that meant. "Dad, Alan raised a hand, silencing him. "I read the messages. All of them. So, let's start with the obvious. How long have you been hanging out with Jason?" Ryan swallowed hard. "A couple of months. Mom said he could help with college stuff. He's got connections, you know? Scholarships, internships." "Connections?" Alan cut him off, his voice rising. "He's not helping you, Ryan. He's using you to wedge himself into this family. And you," Alan leaned forward, his eyes locked on his son's, "you let it happen." Ryan's cheeks flushed with anger and embarrassment. "That's not fair. You're always working, Dad. You never have time for stuff like this. Jason listens. He cares about the things I want to do." Alan's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "You think he cares? He's playing you, Ryan. And while you're out joyriding in his car, I'm here building a future for you. Everything you have, this house, your practices, that damn phone, exists because I worked for it. Don't you dare tell me I don't care." Ryan looked away, his bravado crumbling. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," he muttered. "You didn't mean for what?" Alan pressed. "For me to find out? For your mom to lie to my face while she spends my money on some shiny distraction?" Ryan's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know what to do, Dad. Mom said Jason was just trying to help." Alan leaned back, exhaling slowly. His son's guilt was real, but it didn't erase the betrayal. "Ryan, you made a choice. You chose to trust him instead of me. Now, you're going to help fix it. How? Ryan asked, his voice barely a whisper. You're going to tell me everything, Alan said. Every meeting, every conversation, every dime Mom's spent that you know about. And then, we're going to make sure Jason understands one thing: this family is mine. Later that evening, May returned home to an eerily quiet house. The kitchen lights were dim, and Alan was seated at the table, a folder of documents in front of him. You're late, Alan said without looking up. I had work, May replied, her voice defensive. Sales reports needed finalizing. Alan flipped a page in the folder. Sales reports? Or Jason's latest golf trip? Maybe a lease agreement for the BMW you're so fond of? May froze, her fingers tightening around her purse strap. What are you talking about? Alan pushed the folder toward her. Bank statements. Transfers from the college fund. Receipts for dinners, tickets, spa days. Should I keep going? May's face went pale, her practiced composure slipping. Alan, I can explain. Don't bother, Alan interrupted. This isn't about explanations. This is about consequences. You've been siphoning money from your family, lying to me, and letting some sleazeball play father to our son. It ends now. May's voice rose in desperation. You don't understand, Alan. You're so focused on work that you've stopped seeing me. Jason, he noticed. He made me feel important again. Alan stood, towering over her. Important? Do you think that matters when you've destroyed your son's trust, your marriage, your future? Jason won't stick around, May. But the damage you've done will. May's lip quivered, but she held her ground. So, what now? Alan's expression hardened. Now, I take back control. You want to keep playing house with Jason? Be my guest. But you'll do it without a dime from me. Alan stood outside the sleek glass office building of Coastal Auto Group, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his work jacket. The early morning breeze carried the faint scent of sea salt, but Alan barely noticed. His jaw was clenched, and his mind was focused. Today wasn't about words, it was about action. Inside, the office bustled with energy. Rows of luxury cars gleamed under fluorescent lights, salespeople flitted between clients, and Jason Prescott, the dealership's manager, was perched in his glass-walled office, sipping coffee. His tailored suit and confident demeanor were the epitome of slick professionalism. Alan marched past the receptionist, ignoring her protests. Mr. Prescott's busy. He'll make time, Alan growled, pushing the office door open with enough force to rattle the glass. Jason looked up, startled, before breaking into a practiced smile. Alan Taylor, he said smoothly, standing to greet him. I didn't expect to see you here. What can I do for you? Alan stepped forward, his presence filling the room. You can start by staying the hell away from my family. Jason's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. I'm not sure I understand. May and I work together, it's strictly professional. Alan chuckled darkly. Strictly professional? That's what you call taking my wife out to dinners, buying her gifts, and treating my son like he's yours? Jason held up his hands defensively. Look, Alan, I think you're misinterpreting things. May and I. Save it, Alan snapped, slamming his hands on Jason's desk. The coffee cup wobbled precariously, spilling its contents. I've seen the receipts. I've read the messages. Don't insult me by pretending this is some innocent mentorship. Jason straightened, his tone hardening. If you came here to throw accusations, you're wasting your time. May's her own person. She came to me, not the other way around. Alan's eyes narrowed. Let me make this clear. You don't talk to her. You don't text her. And you sure as hell don't involve my son in whatever game you're playing. Jason smirked, leaning back in his chair. Or what? You will punch me? Throw me out of my own office? Face it, Alan, you're just some washed-up construction worker clinging to a family that's already moved on. Alan's fists tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. You think you've won because you've got a nice suit and a fancy car? Let me tell you something, Jason, everything you are is surface level. The second it stops being convenient, May will see through you. And when she does, she'll realize what a fool she's been. Jason's smirk vanished, replaced by irritation. I don't need to explain myself to you. Alan stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. You don't. But you will explain yourself to the board of directors when I send them the details of your little extracurricular activities. I'm sure they'll be thrilled to hear how you've been mismanaging their funds to impress another man's wife. Jason's expression shifted to alarm. You wouldn't. Alan smiled coldly. Try me. After Alan left, Jason sat in his office, the confrontation replaying in his mind. He had underestimated Alan, mistaking his blue-collar demeanor for weakness. But now, Jason knew he had a problem. He pulled out his phone and called May. We need to talk, he said curtly when she answered. May's voice was tense. Jason, I can't. Alan's already furious. Alan's the least of your worries, Jason interrupted. He's threatening to go to the board. If he does, I could lose everything. May hesitated. What do you expect me to do? Fix this, Jason snapped. Convince him to back off. Or this little arrangement between us ends, and you're on your own. May hung up, her mind racing. That evening, Alan returned home to find May waiting in the kitchen, her expression a mix of guilt and frustration. What did you do? She demanded. Alan raised an eyebrow. What I should have done weeks ago. I told Jason to back off. Alan, he's furious. He says you're threatening his job. Alan stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. Good. He deserves worse for what he's done. And if you're smart, you'll cut ties with him before he drags you down too. May's shoulders sagged. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she said quietly. Alan's expression softened, but only slightly. Then take responsibility, May. Stop making excuses. Fix what you can, and leave the rest to me. True to his word, Alan compiled the evidence of Jason's misconduct and sent it to Coastal Auto Group's board of directors. Within weeks, Jason was removed from his position, his reputation in tatters. When Ryan heard the news, he approached Alan cautiously. Dad, was that you? Alan nodded. It had to be done. Jason was a threat to this family, and I won't let anyone jeopardize what we have. Ryan looked down, guilt shadowing his face. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't realize how bad it was. Alan placed a hand on his son's shoulder. You made a mistake, Ryan. But what matters is what you do next. Stick with me, and we'll get through this together. May stood in the quiet kitchen, the same space where she had so often prepared meals while Alan worked late nights to support their family. Now, it felt foreign, colder, emptier. The weight of Alan's words echoed in her mind, fix what you can, and leave the rest to me. She replayed Jason's threats from earlier that day, his voice sharp with desperation. He was gone now, ousted from his job and likely spiraling. The thought brought her no satisfaction, only a deep sense of shame. She had let things spiral too far, convincing herself that Jason's charm and attention filled a void she wasn't willing to admit had grown over years of neglecting her own happiness. But none of that excused the choices she had made. Jason was a distraction, a mirror reflecting her own insecurities. Now, she had to face the wreckage and decide what kind of person she wanted to be moving forward. May knew she had hurt Alan, but her relationship with Ryan weighed even heavier on her conscience. Her affair hadn't just betrayed her husband, it had created a rift between her and her son. She found Ryan in the living room, headphones on as he played a video game. Ryan, can we talk? She asked softly. Ryan paused the game, his shoulders tense. What is it, Mom? May sat on the edge of the couch, clasping her hands nervously. I've made some mistakes, Ryan. Big ones. And I know they've affected you. Ryan's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't say anything. I let someone into our lives who had no right to be there, May continued. And I let him influence you in ways that I shouldn't have. That's on me, and I'm so sorry. Ryan looked at her, his expression conflicted. Why did you do it? Dad worked so hard for us, and you just threw it all away. Tears filled May's eyes. I wish I had a good answer, but I don't. I was selfish. I felt unimportant, like I wasn't enough. But that's no excuse for what I did. Ryan set down his controller, his voice quiet. Jason said you didn't care about Dad anymore. Was that true? May shook her head vehemently. No. I've always cared about your father. I just lost sight of what mattered. I let my own doubts and insecurities cloud everything. But I promise you, Ryan, I'm going to make this right. Ryan's gaze softened, though the hurt was still there. You have a lot to fix, Mom. Not just with me, but with Dad too. That evening, May approached Alan, who was sitting in his workshop organizing tools. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape and think. Alan, May began hesitantly, her voice trembling. Alan didn't look up. What do you want, May? I want to apologize, she said, stepping closer. Not just for Jason, but for everything that led to this. For ignoring how hard you've worked for this family. For not appreciating you the way I should have. Alan's hand stilled, but he didn't speak. I thought Jason filled the gap, May continued, tears streaming down her face. But he didn't. He just made it worse. And I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Alan finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and sadness. You can't undo what's been done, May. Words don't rebuild trust. Actions do. If you're serious about fixing this, it's going to take time. And it's going to take work. Are you ready for that? May nodded. I am. Then start with the kids, Alan said. They need you to show up for them. Not just physically, but emotionally. Prove to them, and to me, that you're still the woman I married. Over the next few weeks, May took small but meaningful steps to regain her family's trust. She attended Ryan's soccer games, cheered him on from the sidelines, and avoided discussing Jason entirely. With Terry, she spent quiet afternoons reading books and helping him with puzzles, slowly breaking through his initial hesitation. One Saturday, as Tammy worked on a school project at the kitchen table, May joined her, offering to help. I can handle it, Mom, Tammy said, her tone distant. I know you can, May replied gently. But I'd like to help if you'll let me. Tammy hesitated before sliding over a stack of papers. Fine. Just don't mess it up. May smiled, grateful for even the smallest olive branch. Weeks turned into months, and though the pain of betrayal lingered, the family found moments of connection. May continued her therapy, reflecting on her mistakes and the patterns that had led her astray. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Tammy cracked a joke about Alan's obsession with perfect drywall corners, earning laughter from everyone, even May. Alan looked around the table, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in months, it felt like healing was possible. Ryan stood on the edge of the soccer field, tying his cleats as the fall breeze ruffled his jersey. Practice was about to start, but his thoughts were elsewhere. For months, his world had been a whirlwind of tension and hard truths. He couldn't shake the guilt of the role he had played in the family drama, how he had blindly followed Jason's charm, unknowingly driving a wedge between his parents. As practice wrapped up, Coach Martinez called him over. Ryan, you've been off lately, he said, his voice kind but firm. You've got potential, but you're not giving it your all. What's going on? Ryan hesitated, looking down at the ground. Just stuff at home. Family stuff. The coach nodded. That happens to everyone, kid. But let me give you some advice, control what you can. Focus on the field, and let the rest sort itself out. The word stuck with Ryan as he walked home. He realized that he had been drifting, letting the chaos around him dictate his actions. It was time to take responsibility, not just for himself, but for the trust he had broken with his dad. Later that evening, Ryan found Alan in the garage, working on his old truck. The rhythmic clink of tools filled the air, a sound Ryan had grown up hearing. "Hey, Dad," Ryan said, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. Alan didn't look up. "What's up, Ryan?" "I wanted to talk," Ryan said, stepping inside. "About everything." "About Jason." Alan paused, setting down his wrench. "Go on." Ryan took a deep breath. "I was wrong to trust him. I thought he was cool, you know? With the car, the tickets, all that stuff. But I didn't see what he was doing to you, or to Mom." Alan leaned against the truck, crossing his arms. "And now?" "Now I see it," Ryan said, his voice earnest. "I see how hard you work, how much you've done for us. I was stupid to think Jason cared about me or our family. He just used me to get to Mom." Alan studied his son for a moment before nodding. "It takes guts to admit when you're wrong. But trust, Ryan, that's something you have to earn back. You get that, right?" Ryan nodded. "Yeah, I get it. And I'm ready to earn it." Alan placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Good. Start by showing up, not just here, but in everything you do. Your word matters, Ryan. Don't forget that." Ryan took his father's advice to heart. He threw himself into soccer, becoming one of the most dependable players on the team. His grades improved, and he started taking more responsibility at home, helping with chores and spending time with his younger siblings. One afternoon, Tammy teased him as they washed dishes together. "What happened to Mr. Too Cool for Family?" Ryan smirked. "He grew up." Even Terry, who had been wary of Ryan's earlier idolization of Jason, started warming up again. One evening, as they played a board game, Terry grinned. "You're way better at this than that other guy." Ryan laughed. "Thanks, buddy. I'll take that as a compliment." One weekend, during a supervised visit with May, Ryan found himself alone with her while Tammy and Terry played in the park. "Ryan," May said softly, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. I see how much you've stepped up lately." Ryan shrugged, his gaze on the ground. "Just trying to make things right." "You are," May said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'm sorry for putting you in the middle of everything. You deserve better." Ryan looked at her, his expression serious. "We all deserve better. But at least you're trying now." May smiled, a small glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Thank you, Ryan. That means a lot." One evening, as the family sat together watching a movie, Ryan leaned over to Alan. "Dad, I've been thinking about college. I know it's still a couple of years away, but do you think I should work for it like you did? Build my way up?" Alan smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "It's not about following my path, Ryan. It's about finding your own. But whatever you do, do it with integrity. That's what matters most." Ryan nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in months, he felt like he was truly part of the family again, not as a burden or a mistake, but as someone contributing to its strength. The days following Ryan's apology marked a turning point for the Taylor family. Slowly but steadily, the wounds left by betrayal began to scab over, though the scars were far from healed. For Alan and May, the road ahead was the most complicated. May had moved into a small apartment nearby, a modest place that reflected her new reality. Gone were the flashy dinners and expensive perks Jason had lavished upon her. She spent her time working, attending therapy, and focusing on her supervised visits with the kids. One crisp Saturday morning, Alan brought the kids to May's apartment for their scheduled visit. As Tammy and Terry raced inside, Alan hesitated in the doorway. May noticed and offered a tentative smile. "Want to come in for a coffee?" she asked softly. Alan frowned but nodded, stepping inside. The apartment was sparsely decorated, with only a few personal touches, photos of the kids, a small bookshelf, and a well-worn sofa. "Nice place," Alan said flatly, sitting at the kitchen table. "Thanks," May replied, setting 2 mugs on the table. She sat across from him, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her cup. "I've been meaning to thank you, Alan. For letting me see the kids. For not shutting me out completely." Alan took a sip of coffee before replying. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for them. They need their mom, no matter what's happened between us." May flinched at his words, but nodded. "I understand. And I know I have a lot to prove, not just to them, but to you." Alan leaned back, studying her. "Proving things to me isn't what matters, May. You need to prove to yourself that you're not the person who made those choices. That's the only way this family has a chance." Weeks later, the family gathered at Tammy's middle school for a special awards ceremony. Tammy had been selected as Student of the Year, and her parents were invited to sit in the front row. As Tammy walked across the stage to accept her award, Alan and May exchanged a rare smile. It was a fleeting moment of unity, a shared pride in their daughter's achievements. After the ceremony, Tammy insisted on a group photo. She handed her phone to Ryan and pulled her parents close. "Smile," she said, snapping the picture. The photo captured something neither Alan nor May expected, a glimpse of the family they had been, and perhaps, could be again. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Alan sat alone in the living room, the photo from Tammy's phone on his screen. The image stirred a mix of emotions, nostalgia, sadness, and a faint flicker of hope. He barely noticed the knock at the door. When he opened it, he found May standing there, her hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket. "Alan," she began, her voice steady but nervous, "can we talk?" Alan stepped aside, motioning her in. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the air between them heavy. "I've been thinking a lot," May said, her eyes fixed on her hands. "About everything. About us. I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness, but I hope we can find a way forward. For the kids, if nothing else." Alan sighed, his gaze distant. "May, I've spent months trying to figure out how we got here. Was it me? Was it you? Was it both of us?" She looked up, her eyes glistening. "It was me. I let myself believe I wasn't enough, and instead of talking to you, I looked for validation somewhere else. I'll regret that for the rest of my life." Alan was silent for a long moment before speaking. "I can't promise we'll ever go back to the way things were. But I can promise to try. For the kids." May nodded, tears spilling over. "That's all I can ask." In the weeks that followed, Alan and May worked on rebuilding their relationship, slowly, cautiously, and with the kids' well-being at the forefront. They attended family therapy sessions, where they learned to communicate better and confront the unresolved tension between them. One evening, as they sat together at Tammy's soccer game, May turned to Alan. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" he asked, genuinely curious. "For not giving up on me," she replied. "Or on us." Alan didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was steady. "I didn't do it for you, May. I did it for the family. And maybe for me too."